Hi, Jess. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can hear you now.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Good, thanks. Good, thanks. Yeah, I'm just going to leave you here, and then as the people are coming on, I'll just allow them into the room, and then yeah, you can get started at 3:30. All right.
Okay,
All right,
perfect.
great. So I'm just
Awesome,
going to
thanks.
go off. If you need anything, you can just send me a message. All right.
Cool, got it. Thanks.
Thanks. Cheers.
Cheers.
hear me? Can you hear me, Jess?
Hi, Michael. Yes, I can hear you.
I can't hear you at the moment. Here we go.
Can you hear me now?
Oh. Can you hear me and see me?
Hi, Khalil. Yes, I can.
Nice to meet you, Jess. How are you?
Yes, you too. You did have Michael here a second ago.
Can you hear me?
Hello, Michael. Yeah, I can hear.
Michael, could I just ask you to close that curtain behind you? Your face is kind of in the shadow at the moment.
Let us.
Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, Michael, we can hear you.
Oh, I can't hear you. Okay. Hello.
Hello. Yeah. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Michael, can you hear us now? I guess that's a no. Hi, Winnie. How are you?
Thank you. How are you?
Great. Good. You can hear us okay?
Yes, I can. I've had to log in using my phone, but I hope I'm audible all the same.
Yep, we can hear you.
Jess, I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes, I can. Excellent.
Ah.
Success. Good.
Can you hear
Great.
me?
Hi, Jonathan. Yes.
Oh, you can. Cool.
Wonderful.
Good.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, everyone. I'll just give Michael a second.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Khalil. Good to see you.
Hello, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm good.
Good to
Hi,
see you.
Winnie.
Hello, Winnie.
Okay, so we'll just give it a couple of seconds just for the other sessions to wrap up. I see we have 25 people tuned in to us already, so they can see us. Let's wait for some of the other sessions to wrap up first.
Jess, I think Kafir has said we can begin.
Yep, I'm just waiting for Michael to come back. There we go.
Hey, sorry.
Cool. All right, let's do this thing. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session on the changing face of East Africa's office market.
Thank you.
My
very
name's
much.
Jess Keeper. I'm the Group Managing Director for East Africa and Indian Ocean at Royal Property Group. And I'm really delighted to be hosting this particular discussion because it's a topic that I think is, it's really exciting and dynamic. It covers everything from workplace design to organizational psychology and human behavior, from demand and supply fundamentals to breaking new ground on negotiating interesting and innovative structural models. And I mean, the world as we know it has been pushed onto a different trajectory, and the same is true about the commercial property market. And the role of the workplace, it's a topic that's really found its way into the mainstream media recently. And it's funny how everyone who's been working from home lately is now suddenly an individual expert on the role of the office. And of course, there are plenty of justifications both ways. I think you could argue equally that the office is doomed or that it's more important than ever, but in perhaps a slightly different format. So to discuss these issues on the panel today, I have 4 true experts in their fields, so please allow me to introduce them to you. We have Jonathan Turner, who's Managing Director, Advisory and Transaction Services Africa at CBRE Accelerate. We have Khalil Qatari, Chief Operating Officer of Houseman, Michael Aldridge, CEO, Kafisi, and Winnie Gachagua, who's a Corporate Real Estate Services Manager at Knight Frank Kenya. So a big welcome to you all, and thank you for sharing your time with us all today. So we'll be having an initial panel discussion, but we really want to broaden it to include everyone who's watching. So if you're in the audience, please feel free to submit your questions or even your own comments and opinions in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll spend some time on these a bit later on. But first, I really want to start by talking about the fundamental shifts in the regional commercial office landscape that have really already started taking place even before COVID-19 appeared. So over the past 5 years, we've seen really strong growth in the serviced office and co-working market across the region. According to the Broll Shared Workspace Research Report that was published recently and is available to download from our website, we found that in Nairobi alone, we have over 50,000 square meters of this flexible office space. And although we had originally expected another 6,000 square meters to be added in the next 12 months, some of this pipeline might end up being impacted by COVID. We also found that nodes with the highest concentration of shared workspace providers are typically the premium office nodes with the best location and amenities like Westlands, Kilimani, Riverside, which really mirrors their attractiveness as prime business locations and points to the type of multinational corporate clients that the serviced office providers were primarily targeting. But there's a huge range available, and private offices cost anywhere between sort of $250 to $600 per month. And with the international restrictions, we've actually seen a shift in the immediate demand from international to local users, especially those requiring smaller spaces. Now, with this sudden forced adoption of agile working, we see many companies are now rethinking their office space requirements, both in terms of the size of the space needed, but also what activities their space should promote. And with a fairly rigid traditional lease, especially in Kenya, in the short term, the relative flexibility of workspace leases might actually lead to an initial reduction in occupation, because this space is the first or only short-term option to exit for some companies looking to cut costs. But in the longer term, we do anticipate that interest for shared workspaces should ultimately rise as tenants undergo a strategic refocus from the old thinking of sort of cost of occupation to a new approach of cost of production. And shared workspaces offer a different approach to doing business. So although we don't expect it to replace traditional leases entirely, we foresee many companies may opt for a hybrid approach that delivers the best of both worlds. So it gives them a balance of space and tools that their staff need to work, with increasing flexibility and reducing the heavy fixed overheads of traditional offices. So to expand on this a bit further, let's turn to the panel, and I'm going to start with Jonathan. So ultimately, everything is driven by demand and the needs of the user. So from an occupier's perspective, do you think we'll see a redistribution between core and flexi space? And I guess the big question for the property owners out there is, how do you expect this to affect the overall demand?
So I think, Jess, from an international stance, that redistribution has been shifting and changing rapidly over the last 10 years. You know, from startups and SMEs right through to the large global businesses. And Africa has been a little bit later on that curve, but it is definitely has been happening, and that will increase in my view. You know, the impact of the pandemic has simply reinforced the key drivers in the medium to longer term for adopting a more flexible strategy in terms of property and then the adoption of flex space as part of that. And that will be alongside any move to a work from home approach as well. So, you know, those key drivers of it's an outsourced model, it enables the business to focus on its key operations, pass the responsibility for facilities to a flex operator. You've got cheaper entry costs, moving the financial model from CapEx to OpEx. You've got cost certainty and fixed cost solutions. You've got the ability to be speed to market. And it inherently provides an ability for a business to expand or contract as is required in a much faster and much more agile way in terms of business changes in business strategy and business needs. But I also think, and you talked about it in terms of changes of ways of working, it does reflect the change around ways of working, including more co-working, collaboration, innovation, incubator space, and so forth. And that will come to the fore as businesses drive more innovation and productivity requirements. I think clearly in Africa, not least, you know, infrastructure can be quite an impact on that. And secondly, there's the cultural aspect as well. We've seen the move from traditional offices to activity-based working, even within core space, to be quite a journey for businesses to come to, and maybe an inherent lack of, I don't know, trust maybe in terms of staff as well when they're looking to be a bit more remote than being in the core office. How's it going to affect demand? As I've said, I think there'll be a greater demand for flex space, but I actually think there'll be a redistribution from a locational perspective. I think you will see a more hub and spoke model for many of the larger corporates. I think they'll have core space that's run by the company, and they'll have hub space that may be a flex operator, maybe a smaller core space alongside any work from home strategy. And I also think it gives opportunities for occupiers to partner more with flex operators. And that's not just in terms of going into their space or even having them in their own core space and providing a flex model within that. But also in terms of the membership model, multiple members being able to use different locations. And actually over time, I see that changing from not just being with one operator, but you'll have maybe an aggregator come in and be providing memberships where staff can actually go and take space across multiple operators.
Absolutely. So I think we can really expect to see fundamental changes in how offices are used going forward. So on that, Khalil, because of this, what changes do you expect to see in the short to medium term for both office design and the workplace configuration? And how do you think this will impact landlords and developers?
Thanks for the question. I mean, maybe I can start with a punchline, but this is not the end of the office market, that's for sure. I think the COVID-19 has just accelerated a transformation that actually has started. Digitalization was already there. Dematerialization was also there. So the interesting timing we have now is that this crisis has accelerated things, and I think that's also room for opportunities. I think this is really important to know that. In terms of changes, I mean, for sure, the hygiene is now in the center of all the discussions. I mean, in our business of office fit outs, but also in our flex solutions, we haven't seen project cancelled, but we have seen project postponed. One of the reasons why they are postponed is let's redesign, let's check if the densities are right, is the circulation correct in the office. I think really this is what we have noticed. Today the idea is the way you see your workstations should be also a way to protect your, not separate you from your colleagues, because I think it's a bit extreme to say that, but let's say to keep you safe. We need to think about that. I think this is something I need to be creative around this subject. To the point of Jonathan, I think there will be kind of distributed offices, and the location will be very, very. I mean, a serious indicator and a serious thing to consider. The hub will not disappear, I think, but the social distancing to be respected, you will need between 30 and 40. The sweet spot is between 13 and 40% occupancy rate today on the hub. So you will have to organize shifts, but you will have also maybe to bring the office closer to home. And this is where I'm quite in line with what Jonathan said. I mean, we will need to look at where in different locations of the city we can create some co-working or flex solution to welcome people, because we still need to group. We still need to be. I mean, we are in a hybrid approach now. We work from home, but you cannot only work from home. So you need to meet with your colleague. You need to socialize. You need to be creative, and so we need to understand how we can bring 10 to 15 people together for a project in a company and so on. And this is what we see from the companies we are working with. On the fit out, they are really being more, let's say, of course, I don't want to be extreme. I'm not saying that offices should resemble to hospitals. Far from this, but we need to look at materials that can bear some heavy cleaning processes. This is the kind of thing we need now to look at. We had 2, 3, 4 months to react, but we had to propose something. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So the design of offices needs to change to reflect how they'll be used. And changing the design is one thing, but changing the way that humans behave in that space can be a lot more difficult. And that's where the good design can actually really support that. I mean, we're seeing ideas coming out of, some companies where, circulation space is sort of one way, like you're only allowed to walk like clockwise around the office. But how do you get people to do that unless that's built into the design? And I can completely understand why projects might have been paused to go back and relook at those, because it's so important to get it right from the beginning. So clearly the way we use this office space will change. And as employers and property owners and facilities managers and as humans, we have a duty of care to look after the people who use our buildings. So Winnie, these enhanced hygiene initiatives will play a big role in this, but they might have an impact on increasing operational expenditure. So how are you seeing landlords and occupiers approaching this discussion? And at the end of the day, who bears the cost? Winnie, can you hear us? Did you catch that question?
Hi. Yeah, I had the question. Sorry, Jess. So obviously, I think the message that has been sent across the entire morning and throughout the discussions that I've carried on in the course of the day today is the need for greater collaboration between landlords and occupiers in order for both of them to coexist in the current market conditions. That said, definitely the cost initiatives that have been introduced in commercial buildings and office, that is both office buildings, retail buildings, have definitely had an impact on operational budgets, seeing as these costs were not budgeted for initially when operational costs budgets were submitted to the client, to landlords for approval. However, what has happened with time, as we've gone through the various phases of this pandemic, is that most collaboration with tenants have
We may well have lost her.
I think so.
Yes. Yeah.
We might have to come back to that.
All
Jess.
right.
Yeah, I think I'll come back to that. I wasn't sure if it was just me who had
No.
lost the sound for a second. Okay, so Winnie, I don't know if you can hear us. We're going to pause that question. We'll come back to it later if your connection strengthens a bit. I can just see there's a little icon that says that your connection's a bit weak at the moment. So I think moving on, we're seeing that, as Winnie said at the beginning, so everything is a balance, and it's a balance between landlords and tenants, and everyone is very reliant on each other these days. Landlords need strong tenants, and tenants need strong landlords to be able to survive. But we're really seeing some tough operating conditions for almost every type of business out there. So asking Michael now, how are the co-working and flexible office providers trading during these COVID times and beyond into the future? Like, do you think they'll be able to achieve the desired rentals in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, for instance?
Great, thanks very much. It's good to see you again. And we've learned a lot since the last webinar, which I believe was right at the beginning of this period of history. I certainly know we've learned a lot more than we knew then, but we still have a whole bunch of unknowns that we're all collectively in the industry trying to work through. We're very much, as Kafisi, we're a product-led business, so we've spent a lot of time trying to think through how those changes in product will affect the market and also the proposition, knowing that ultimately the decision from the user, from the member, is putting space first. Space is there to encourage productivity in their teams, but the rankings of those drivers have changed massively. And so when you then think through the types of providers that are in the market, albeit they're grouped together in one sector, there are different, if subtle, differences between each of the types. At the retail end and the co-working side, I think the idea of people being in large open spaces working together, they're suffering because that's a risk. It's a very apparent risk, and those businesses are evolving. Unfortunately, we are seeing certain players have struggled with that product line. The sense of connection between individuals that was garnered by being in a co-working environment perhaps is slightly under threat in the current format. But then obviously you've got other layers at the small to medium enterprise, which is where flexible serviced office business really started, and then the truly sort of flexible solutions for established enterprise. At that end of the market, which is where Kafisi operates, we found actually that the demand for products actually increased. But the type of product that those businesses require are changing themselves. And so with clients that we've had, so like Google in Lagos, where we put them into office space, they've changed their views about how that should operate now. Ironically, a bank of 4-man offices is probably the best product to have at the moment, because that gives a sense of security to the individual businesses they buy. But look, the challenges have certainly not escaped this industry, but we still believe that the macro is as big, if not bigger. And I think in any of these conversations that we have, and it's great, I think both the sector and our environment have become more newsworthy. But ultimately, sometimes one thing we say is not much different to where we were 6 months ago. It's the emerging nature of the market. It's a robust kind of sector. that we believe works whether you're expanding or entrenching in any sector. So, you know, there's always going to be demand for it. It's just the priorities of the member base. And when they think through that buying decision, I don't think price is really where they're concerned. I think they're more concerned about making sure that their greatest asset, their people, can be as productive and as safe as possible in an environment where they need to get together. So, you know, I think we may well be, you know, at the start of a huge growth spurt for this sector.
Absolutely. I think something that we saw, especially at the beginning, is that the solutions that we needed to address this situation were typically solutions that we already had in play. It's just that they were right at the beginning of their trajectory. And so what we've seen is this incredible acceleration and this incredible attention that's been drawn to, you know, the role of the office in the workplace. And I think an interesting discussion to have, and maybe we'll get to this after the panel discussion, maybe as part of the questions, is this concept of price versus flexibility, because of the, you know, there's this thought that, you know, you pay a premium to get the flexibility. But like I said, if we're moving away from this idea of cost of occupation versus cost of production, then that balance becomes very easy to see. As you said, you need to be looking at what does it cost you to have your people doing the work that they need to do, as opposed to what does it cost you to occupy this space. And it's a slightly different approach.
Yeah. It's a slightly commonly misunderstood point out there, because it's not actually more expensive. It's assumed to be because of just you're actually looking at a headline price. But once you add in, as Jonathan was saying, once you start blending together OPEX and CAPEX, and you're a bit more attuned, and you think about management time, efficiency of space, and you know, it is actually, I think there's good maths out there to sort of display the fact that it's almost 25% cheaper to actually be in a flex space, certainly up to certain size of business. But what I think is really interesting is that before, when we've had these conversations with companies, big companies, you're trying to move the intangible benefit into a tangibly understood value for money. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the differential between certain businesses, to win the best workers and to get the most out of your teams, you want to have the best environments for them to work in. You've got to invest in those people, and therefore outsource that like you would any other skill set in normal business. So you can focus on your middle and front office, right? And now that, because of COVID and because of the health issues and the safety, that intangible has kind of taken a different version. But now it's becoming, you're getting an easier conversation with those that are making the decisions around these kind of costs. So, you know, we've always believed that we're great value for money to give a great day of work to your staff.
Absolutely, yeah, and we've seen that come through in the numbers for, as you say, up to a certain size. Yeah, once you factor in all the different elements that you might not necessarily associate with your property costs, it does actually, you know, become quite a viable solution. So Winnie, I see you're back. Let's try this again. Do you want to have a chat, continue your answer? We were talking about the role of hygiene initiatives and the approach between landlords and occupiers, and who bears that cost and responsibility.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, sorry about the connection earlier. So I think the message that has been sent across throughout the earlier sessions that have been discussed throughout the day is that, you know, there's need for collaboration between landlords and tenants at this particular time for both to thrive in this market. So while the cost initiatives that have been introduced in buildings to improve hygiene have certainly had an unexpected additional cost on operational budgets, most landlords and property managers have been implementing cost measures cost-saving operational measures with the aim of reducing service charge costs. Since most buildings are not at full occupation. I think the average occupation rate, I think for most buildings in office buildings in Nairobi is about 50%. So some of these measures, including energy conservation, reducing on unnecessary workforce, some guards, caretakers, cleaners, and maintenance teams, has definitely had an effect on making some significant savings on operational costs, which in turn, obviously, the service charge and operational costs being a tenant account means that they are making, ultimately, when service charge account is audited, they will be making some savings. In fact, the savings from the cost-cutting initiatives on operational on the budget on the budget or on operational costs outweighs the hygiene measures that have been initiated by most landlords and property managers to try and make sure that buildings are safe for tenants to reoccupy. So ultimately, and I don't want to preempt this conversation with tenants and landlords much later or in the year, we might make savings, tenants might make savings as opposed to actually having to pay more on the service charge account.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that really highlights the importance of the partnership between the owner, the property manager, and the tenant. They all have to work together. There are ways that we have been able to find savings while still keeping people safe. So, yeah, but as I said, it's a partnership, and every little piece contributes towards it. So I think when we're looking at the future of the office market, we know that it will look a bit different. I think the most fascinating part is how people will react to it. And Jonathan, I want to ask you, so I think we've established that the management and the function of properties can and will change, but what behavioural adjustments do you think will outlive this crisis period? And how will these impact on corporate real estate strategies going forward?
Okay, so, I mean, yeah, there's going to be absolutely dramatic changes in the working environment, but I think fundamental is the aspect of choice, giving employees the choice, where and how do they work, when do they work, and so forth. And we've seen that a lot in some of the established markets, and I think that is going to start to resonate more in the sub-Saharan African markets. I think also with that, it requires a fundamental shift in management style. Management style has to be about output based, not input. And, that is something that I think is going to be quite a behavioral change and be required. I think also in terms of the actual environment that's got to be created, we've Khalil, Michael, all talked about collaboration. You did in the introduction. Yes, we need to have more collaborative opportunity. And what is the function of the office? So I'm not going to go into that, but I think it's got to be a welcoming environment. It's got to attract staff. It's got to be a reason for someone to want to go to the office. But also when they're there, they've got to actually be productive. There's got to be it's got to help people to not only develop and grow themselves, but also to be productive from a business perspective. And that can be in a core space or a flex environment. I think in terms of your question around impact on corporate real estate strategy, and Michael referenced this, what is it that's going to enable a business to optimize the productivity of its staff? And the well-being of staff is critical to that and how they feel and what they experience, but also the right sort of environment from which they can operate. I don't think that working from home as a fundamental strategy for everybody is ever going to work. We're social animals. We need to have that interaction. But more fundamental than that, in most of our sub-Saharan African markets, is actually the ability for people to do that. The reliability of the internet. I mean, we've seen it today. The You know, we've had load shedding in South Africa. People are offline for 4 hours. It's not really very helpful unless they've got backup generators. Not everybody has a backup generator at home. The cost and speed of data. Who's paying for the data? You know, our company is going to reimburse their staff for that extra data that they're going to require. And not everybody has a home working environment that they can create a very productive workspace. So I think, you know, it's going to be a combination of things, and behaviors need to change to reflect that.
Absolutely. I think we've always said that, you know, a corporate real estate strategy, it's not just property. You need to involve HR, you need to involve IT. It's all these policies around, you know, your people and how they work. And I'm going to borrow from a webinar that we did as Broll on Friday. It was one about leadership through lockdown, where some of us shared our lessons from lockdown. And I think my biggest lesson was exactly your comments at the beginning about choice. So for me, it was about, as a manager of businesses and people, it's about making room for the individual. So, you know, we're learning so much more about our colleagues over the past few months than we ever have before. I mean, if you pay a bit of attention, you know exactly like who's a night owl and who's an early riser and who has responsibilities at home and who wants to be in the office every day and who likes the quiet focus of working from home, and who likes WhatsApp messages and who saves all their questions for a phone call. And if you pay attention to that and make room for that and adjust your own behavior and expectations, it means that you can give everybody what they need to be their best, which is ultimately how you want people to perform. So all of a sudden, yeah, we talk about corporate real estate strategies, and it's so much more about the people than the property. And I think that also comes back to Khalil's earlier point about, you know, designing the offices, about how people will be using them. So I want to go back to Winnie, actually, because we've spoken a lot, and a big theme, I think, throughout all these webinars that we've been doing throughout lockdown and everything have really highlighted the value of this long-term relationship between a strong landlord and a strong tenant. It's now more important than ever. So Winnie, how are you seeing lease negotiations change as a result of these current market challenges?
Hi, can you hear me?
We've got you now. Go for it.
So with widespread economic shutdown, a lot of businesses have been having a lot of difficult conversations with landlords. Occupiers are certainly struggling to meet the rental obligations, and in turn, landlords are facing a shortfall in income. Some landlords, especially in the retail market segment, have reported only being able to collect about 50 to 55% of total rents since the introduction of restriction measures to curb the spread of the disease here in Kenya. So although the pandemic has caused or brought increased tension between landlord and occupier relationships, those who have entered into constructive dialogue with the mutual understanding to create solutions will be the long-term beneficiaries. What we've seen with the current pandemic is that it has actually turbocharged the need to have a customer-centric real estate service as opposed to just having it as a good. And this is just a transition into the service line, into a more strategic value add, and to create a competitive advantage to landlords who take advantage of that particular line of thought. So some of the changes that we've actually seen in lease negotiations in the last couple of months, obviously our market here in Kenya has been long skewed towards landlords, and tenants have more or less have had to conform with what landlords ideally want.
Okay, I think we're just losing Winnie again, which is a pity. But I think we caught most of that answer. So I think, yeah, shame, she still seems to be frozen. Okay, so I'm going to actually sort of keep with that same theme of partnership and actually turn to you, Michael. And so how are co-working and flexible office partnership models being structured, and are developers still able to achieve their returns?
Yeah, I mean, we're not a developer, so we're a service provider, but I can give you my views, but I mean, I think definitely the flexible market has seen a revolution in the way that everyone is not only using but buying leasing experience workspace, and I think that is fundamentally was already starting to change the way that the relationship between the landlord and the operator could evolve. I think the idea that as we track forwards that flexible workspace operators are going to be taking conventional leases in their entire portfolio is very unlikely. And I think the idea of landlords working closer with operators is a good thing. I think to be able to sit on the same side of the table and think about the building in combination with the service provider to ensure that the users of the building are getting not just a well-built building, but a good service when they're inside. And those tenant services that I talked about earlier are more and more important, specifically when it comes to health and safety. But historically, it's not really been the relationship between the landlords and the operator that's been the issue. It's the third person in the relationship. It's the funders of the developers who have taken a mixed view as to the risk around flexible workspace inside the building. I think before the current environment, you were seeing up to sort of low teens, up to 20% of buildings coming into being flexible, and I would envisage that the East African, Southwest African markets will follow that trend, if not lead it, going forwards. For building owners, there is also good evidence that shows that building values can go up. There isn't much data of that in Africa because most of that's come out of developed environments. But I believe that 40% of buildings that had flexible inside are more valuable, right? Because of those type of tenants. And that's because of the way the models can be structured. You're getting an opportunity as a building owner to increase your income stream and diversify your income risk. Now, but depending on where you sit, the landlord can see you as either a risk or as an asset. The risky side of that is because they think that you've got short-term lets and you've got long leases. It's the sort of classic explanation of the market. But the thing that we often talk to with our partners is that we're in the space trading game. So actually, we are more aligned than we would be if a large-scale, albeit well-funded startup took a 7-year lease with you. They could well go out of business because they can lose their funding. Whereas we're trading every day through the same thing that you feel you're exposed to. So there's a much stronger alignment than you'd think. So the idea of management contracts, profit shares, CapEx support deals are really interesting, as well as a fourth area, which is bringing in the corporate backbone to it. So, having the corporates come in and facilitate some of the underwrite of the space for the operator, and then allowing us to be able to provide a wider set of services to a different set of members. So I think all of these are evolutions in the market. But right now, today, I think what we're kind of recalling sort of Project X. There's a distance between here and pick a point, a vaccine or a green flag or whatever is going to happen to say things are kind of understood and back to normal. What space is going to look like between now and then is going to be very difficult. And so I think these partnerships are slightly holding hands but sitting on the side just to see what happens. Because I wouldn't envisage seeing any operator globally going on a large rollout program for the next 6 to 12 months.
Absolutely. I think, your point around diversification of income streams and income risk, I think we can all appreciate that at the moment. So I just want to cover one last question before we turn to the questions that the audience have sent in. And the last question here is for Khalil. So now the data-driven insight approach to workplace design is highly promoted. And although this acceleration of agile and remote working has been adopted quickly by necessity, it's still early days and we don't really have a stabilized track record to guide our decision making. So in this situation, how do companies define the type and size of space that they need for a future that's very uncertain?
Yeah, I think here, I mean, it's the companies for sure. They have to track records and they need to use that data. And this is something that's already started actually. Access control, screening, maximizing the use of the space, which area are used more than the others. I mean, this is something that already started. But I think here, the building owners and the building ops could also help. Basically, and I'm quite convinced that the landlords or the operators that already have some tech in their processes and systems will suffer less the situation, because today, when even as a designer or as a fit out contractor or even as a flexible office solution provider, we need to have around the table the building operators, because we need to collect from them some of this information, and the one that are up to date and can provide this information will help the companies to better and help us to better design basically. So it goes from, again, airflow system, ventilation and so on, but also I think really like how we maximize the use of some of the spaces. And so on. In terms of companies will find out, and I'm sure it's already there. I mean, I'm sure some of the big hubs are experiencing that. There will be some shifts. You cannot welcome everyone, so you need to shift your employees. So you need to bring part of the employees during a shift, and the other part of the company for doing another shift. So that's why also the location, and I think here, coming back to the point of Jonathan and also Michael, the having distributed or satellite maybe offices in Sydney, on Lagos and Abidjan, because we start seeing that, and Nairobi, we see signs of maybe companies looking at some smaller places with an adapted design around Kilimani or Westlands. It's also a message to the developers. I mean, in terms of mapping, you know, like today when we talk about the city, it's always around a CBD or some traditional places. I think the mapping should be extended because we will find out that you cannot have everyone in the office in the same time. So you will have to bring the office closer to home, and this will be the challenge for the next period. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone on the panel. So now that we've heard what all the panelists have to say, it's time to turn to the audience. So we have a couple of questions that have been sent through. The first one, I'm going to direct to you, Jonathan. And the question is, do you foresee an uptick in sale and leaseback transactions for offices with more and more businesses coming under financial and cash flow pressures?
Yes, I think so. Potentially. I think, you know, businesses will potentially look to monetize assets where that equity actually has a better return within the business itself rather than just sitting in real estate. I mean, most companies are not in real estate for the basis of making money out of real estate. You know, real estate is there to facilitate the business operations. And particularly in offices, you know, why would you put your your equity into offices when actually you're going to and should be deriving a much better return out of that equity in the operations of the business. I mean, there's a whole myriad there of issues around that. So it's not a one fits all sort of answer, and it also depends on a lot of different factors in different environments, economies, and so forth. But I think, yeah, certainly, I think companies are definitely looking at how to commercialize. What I would say is actually more about commercializing, equity that they've got invested in real estate, but not as a real estate investor.
Absolutely, yeah. I think a lot of corporates will be sitting with surplus space, and whether that's owned space or leased space, and there's certainly lots of options to monetize that. On a similar note, I think the corporate subleasing activity, there's going to be a lot of musical chairs coming up. It's going to be quite active in some markets at least. The next question, I'm going to throw it open to either Khalil or Michael. You might both each want to respond. Khalil, you've already just briefly touched on it in your last question. And it's in terms of the implementation of technology for property and facilities management. What are the key technology services that you think will be integrated into existing and future office assets? And have developers warmed up to these discussions over the past 3 to 4 months? And will this be a key demand from an occupier perspective?
Khalil,
I can go first. Yeah, I can. On top of my mind, I mean, all the HVAC, antibacterial and antimicrobial filters systems. I think the ventilation will be key. That's one of the thing and that come to my mind. The second thing is really the screening and I won't say the access control, but with the data used properly to understand and to better understand the use of the office and the occupancy. That's the 2 things that I really see as an important element in terms of tech.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the data that's available to you in terms of the touch points of the individual around the office, which is something that we've been looking through and the sector's been moving towards generally, will become more and more apparent and useful, whether it be for tracking of individuals who've come into the building, who've tested positive for COVID, or for monitoring of movements so that you can actually understand the types of facilities and how often they're being used. I think will be an interesting area for growth and development. And I think ultimately there are a whole bunch of areas involved in the daily experience when a member comes to our centres that we're learning more about by using technology. We also believe that technology will be the solution to reducing contact with certain surfaces, and also dare to say, sort of preparing us to be more prepared for this kind of situation. If it happens again, how is the world going to operate now? From food and beverage solutions through to door access, retina scanning, visuals, etc. So, I think technology does tend to find a way to fill those spaces. So we'd expect to see a lot more of it. In terms of the developers, I think that's referencing the building developers rather than the technology developers. But I think, the common areas, historically, I would say the common areas in buildings, in the environments that we've worked in, perhaps not quite at the common standard of a developed environment, of the more global environment. I know standards rise. And I think these kind of considerations now will become absolute requirements of the building rather than nice to haves. And so probably put some of the older buildings in more difficult position. And and we are seeing a lot of good new stock coming online. And so I think some of these bells, the technology that can be used in the community spaces will need to accelerate.
Yeah, and that's generally how we see, functional obsolescence come about in properties. It's usually driven by technology, and usually it's adoption of IT and so on. But hygienic sort of protocols can now actually drive that obsolescence in some buildings, and we'll see how that.
I think as well that the market, specifically with facilities management, has been slightly resistant to change, just because old methods are still being used. That if you relate that back to what we've seen in, say, the UK, the methodologies that are being used outside of South Africa are still relatively archaic. I mean, it's very people heavy, quite beta-based processes, and we've been championing various forms of computer-assisted facilities management systems for some years now. I think the rate of adoption of that will increase because, again, back to the intangible, tangible, it's not just about asset useful economic life now, it's about being able to evidence building quality. And I think that is going to be best done through technology. So that probably will help that industry, that industry specifically, which is great for everyone who's a user of a building.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, so looking to the future, I want to actually refer back to one of the polls that API put up earlier today. And the question was, which real estate sector will perform best in the next 12 to 18 months? And the topic of our session, offices, received a grand total of 4 votes. So 3% of the responses. It was, in terms of the expectations, it has the lowest expectation of outperforming in the next 12 to 18 months. That said, the question that we've been asked by the audience is, outside of Kenya, and I'm happy to get an answer and an opinion from each of you. The question is, outside of Kenya, which East African office market is most promising from a demand perspective?
Well, I can tell you that we believe that across the continent, we believe there's about potentially 11 million usable flexible workspace, and we think that we're at under 200,000 at the moment. So I don't think you need to necessarily pick a specific country or city. I think you can look at any of the major gateway cities, and you can expect to see 10x growth in the number of users in those times. So I mean, I don't know whether that poll was done at a facilities management session or something, but I mean, I think office space will definitely benefit from current markets. And I think anywhere down the East African coast is all the same.
Any other ideas or suggestions of where might the demand be?
I mean, yeah, quite in line with Michael, but okay, if I have to play the game, I pick up a country, I would say Uganda seems interesting with the shock of the oil and gas not coming. Some of the companies, they had to reshuffle a bit their office space, and we see some opportunities there. I'm not saying that it's maybe a short-term thing happening, but this is what we've noticed. So,
Winnie, what are your thoughts?
So obviously Kenya is the gateway. What are your thoughts? I think so obviously Kenya is the gateway. What are your thoughts? Countries or a lot of companies are looking at the East African market. So certainly demand in Kenya will accelerate the growth into the rest of the region. We have seen in the recent past an increase in demand for regional offices or subsidiary offices in the Kenyan coast, Kampala, and Dar es Salaam. And this comes as a 3-pronged or 4-pronged tier this demand requirement. So obviously, I think what will happen is Kenya will ultimately serve as a regional office, and then the rest of the office space, office demand in Kampala, Dar es Salaam, and the Kenyan Post, specifically Mombasa, will feed off the demand that is coming into Nairobi.
Great, thank you. And Jonathan, your answer?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, difficult to answer. But I think also of interest is Addis, actually. You know, we shouldn't forget that. I mean, it is still somewhat difficult to do certain business and set up property services companies and what have you in Ethiopia. But I would see, you know, in terms of demand, Addis, Kampala, probably less, I think, in Dar at the moment. But it does depend on so many other influences. You know, what's happening in the oil and gas sector, for example, as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think as a region, I think East Africa is probably sitting in a better place than some of the other regions and countries. But obviously big differences between each of the countries included. So I think our time is pretty much up. So in closing, I just want to say that it's really exciting to see these next frontiers in our industry, and the things that we've spoken about now are sort of short-term, medium, or turn into sort of long-term shifts. I think it's important that to sustain these, we need a deeper understanding and conversation around the challenges out there. And as I said, there's an even greater need for strong partnerships. So it's been really great to see the positive engagement from our panelists, from the audience, because we all need each other to thrive. So finally, thank you, firstly, to all of the panelists for sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in for this session, the graveyard shift. We appreciate you sticking around. Thanks for being part of the conversation that we hope will help us all to build positive solutions for the challenges we're facing. So thank you, have a good afternoon, and do enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Jess.
Thanks,
you all.
Jess. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks, FBI.